So I just want to explain. So you just heard that my job, my background is I have a PhD in molecular biology, actually in cancer research. I have a degree in natural sciences from Cambridge University. I've also worked as a maths and science teacher. I've also worked as a performer, which is why I'm sort of the one mostly standing here and speaking. And I now work as a science communicator. So what that means is my job involves science broadcasting. I'm a science writer. I've appeared on many different TV shows as a science expert. And I also train people to communicate about science. Now, until about 8 months ago, I knew very little about the climate and ecological emergency, which I now think in itself is a real marker and indicator of the travesty, with the tragedy that we are in as a nation, as a planet. Because in my work, my job is about going into schools and universities and public events and giving talks about the latest science, about various different topics, and helping everyday people to understand what science is all about. And in my whole career, I had not heard very much at all about the climate crisis. Now, I studied a little bit about the climate crisis. I know enough about it through my university studies to be able to understand, now that I've looked into it, what's going on. But the point is, I came along to an Extinction Rebellion protest in April, thinking, really? Is it really as bad as all that? There's all these people on the street shouting and singing and getting arrested. I felt a little bit uncomfortable. I was like, it can't be that bad, surely. I came along to the protest simply to support my partner, who was drumming in the samba band, and I thought, it's great that we're raising awareness, but seriously, it can't be as bad as all that. Because if it really were that bad, firstly, intelligent members of the public, of which I include myself, we would know. Surely we would know. Somebody would have told us. If it were really that bad, it would have been reported on by all the media. It would be on the news every night. It would be in every newspaper. If it was really that bad, then the government would be doing something. They would be putting it into their policies immediately. And if it was really that bad, and we all knew it was that bad, we would be out on the streets protesting like everybody else was in Extinction Rebellion in April. So I was like, look, it can't be. I'm really uncomfortable about this. And given that my whole career, my whole life is about finding the truth, that's been my passion since I was 5 years old, asking why, wanting to understand the world, wanting to make sense of the world. And I was like, right, I can't stand behind this movement. I can't even really be here unless I really believe that this is proportional to what's going on in the world. So from that day, back in April, I have made it my mission. I'm a freelancer, so I work for myself. So I took some time off from my other projects, and I decided I was going to really dig into this and find out the truth. So I did what scientists do. I went to everything that I could find that had been written about the crisis. I read every original article in peer-reviewed journals. I spoke to climate scientists. I joined the community of scientists who were already supporting Extinction Rebellion, and I spoke to professors, to heads of research institutes, to climate scientists across the globe who were doing the primary research. And I went to them and I said, seriously, is it really that bad? Tell me the science, point me towards the articles, let me see for myself. Not that I didn't believe them, but I needed to know. And I can honestly say, I have not had a single good night's sleep since. Because the more I learned, the more I read, the more I discovered, the more I realised that yes, not only is this true, not only is it as bad as all that, but actually it's a hell of a lot worse. And no one is talking about it. The scientific community, as you've heard, have been warning about this for 40 years, and no one has taken any notice. At best, they've ignored us. At worst, they've covered it up actively so that we don't hear about it. So in my work over the last 8 months to really get to the bottom of this crisis of what's going on, together we've formed this community, myself and a bunch of other scientists who were similarly terrified. You heard from Josh, theoretical physicist, similarly horrified and terrified, and you're going to hear in a moment from a bunch of other actual climate scientists. I'm not an actual climate scientist, but I know enough through my career as a scientist, as a researcher. I know how to read papers, I know how to analyse information, and I know how to know what's true. And I know what's true. And I just want to give you a very quick overview, just for a few minutes before I introduce the actual climate scientists. Because my job as a science communicator is to help people to understand the science. And I just want to clarify some of the main kind of skeptical points that people put to us. People put to people like myself and the community here to say, is it really happening? Is it really true? And I also want to invite you to listen, but to also bring your questions. We're going to have time once people have spoken for you to bring your questions, for you to figure out for yourselves if this is the truth. But some of the questions that I've certainly heard that I want to address are, what's actually going on our planet? So this is a hugely big, deep question. But fundamentally, the issue is that over the last 150 years, humans have been burning fossil fuels. We pioneered the Industrial Revolution here in the UK. It was an incredible thing to have happened. But as a result, we've been burning coal, oil and natural gas, which have been releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. This means that the level of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere has been shooting up exponentially. The problem is, carbon dioxide is a very normal and natural thing to have in the atmosphere. We need it in the atmosphere. It's what's called a greenhouse gas. Carbon dioxide, along with other gases like methane and water vapour, trap heat that's coming from the surface of the Earth, which has been warmed because of the heat from the sun. We need those greenhouse gases to trap the heat. They act like a fluffy blanket around the Earth. Without them, we would all be dead because it would be minus 18 degrees at night. We need that fluffy blanket. However, that fluffy blanket has been pretty much going up and down, but pretty much stable for the last thousands, if not millions of years. Because of the greenhouse gas emissions, methane and carbon dioxide, due to burning of fossil fuels and due to land use and due to farming and due to cows which burp out methane, because of that, the levels have been shooting up. That means the fluffy blanket is getting thicker, and it is now so thick that our global temperatures have risen by 1.1 degrees since the start of the Industrial Revolution. Now, firstly, how do we know these two things are linked? Well, we know for sure that the level of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere now is higher than it has been for the last 3 million years. That is not natural causes. That is not Earth cycles. If you research Earth cycles, they do change the levels of carbon dioxide, but over periods of time that are nothing close to what we're looking at now, and we're not even due to be in one of those cycles which pushes it up. So that argument is complete nonsense. How do we know? How do we know that the global temperature change is because of this carbon dioxide? Well, we know directly that this carbon dioxide absorbs heat, infrared heat from the Earth. We can see it on graphs, on charts, and we can see that heating causes the atmosphere to heat up. So we have direct evidence. We also know that the temperature rise we're seeing today has never happened this much, or certainly this fast, for at least 2,000 years. So we are looking at something unprecedented for modern day humans, something that is going to impact all of us. Now, we may also hear people say, is it definitely human action? Yes, it is. Is it definitely carbon dioxide leading to temperature? Yes, it is. Is this heating actually causing damage to the planet? Yes, it is. Oh, but it's a bit colder here today. Yes, because global heating doesn't just cause warming. It causes changes to our weather systems. So, for example, the jet stream, which causes the weather system here in the UK, relies on temperature differences between the equator and the poles. Because of this global warming, yes, it's only 1 degree, but that messes up the jet stream because it makes the Arctic actually warm more than the equator. So the poles are heating more. Overall, it's 1 degree, but what that means is there's less difference between the equator and the poles. That causes extreme weather situations. So yes, some areas get hotter, some get colder, some get wetter, some have more snow, some have floods, some have typhoons and monsoons, and fundamentally, the extreme weather conditions are what are causing a huge amount of damage on our planet. Yes, it's only 1 degree, but also remember, 1 degree is the difference between ice and water. That 1 degree is causing more water to evaporate off the oceans. That fills the air with water vapor, which then gets dumped as rainfall, causing storms. That 1 degree causes melting of the ice caps, which causes water to get dumped into the oceans. Thank you. If we average the melting of the ice over the last 40 years, it amounts to the equivalent of 300 double-decker buses worth of ice melting every second. Every single second. Those rises in sea levels is also compounded by the fact that global heating, even 1 degree higher in our atmosphere, most of that is absorbed by the oceans. 93% of the global heating is absorbed by the oceans. That doesn't just make the ice melt, but it also makes the oceans expand. Basic physics, hotter water takes up more space. Together, this means that the sea levels are rising. Recent data has actually now shown that we've underestimated the impact of this sea level rise by a factor of 3. By the middle of the century, it's now predicted that huge areas of the world, including parts of the UK, particularly those by the coast and by rivers, are going to be subjected to flooding on an annual basis. Areas where up to 300 million people now live. On an annual basis, these people will have to move from their homes or probably permanently. And this is only going to get worse. That means huge areas of places in the world which grow crops, like Vietnam, where all the rice paddies are going to be underwater for a lot of the year. We're not going to be able to use them to grow our food supplies. Extreme weather also means there's going to be a lot more heat-related deaths. Heat waves may feel nice for some of us, but actually 70,000 extra more people died from the heat waves in 2003 than would have died in a normal summer across Europe. So extreme heating, extreme flooding, extreme droughts are going to put a huge pressure on all sorts of areas of our global systems and of the world. You're going to hear in a little bit about some specific examples of that. But I just wanted to clarify the logical sort of the sense of the fact that this is not a debate. This is not kind of a hypothesis or a theory. This is real cold science, and you can't argue with it. This is what's going to happen. This rise in global temperatures will not only cause extreme weather, it will not only cause melting of the ice caps, it also causes acidification of the oceans, because the extra carbon dioxide in the atmosphere dissolves in the oceans, causes it to become more acidic, and this dissolves the shells of sea creatures like clams and oysters, and also bleaches the corals. This is the fundamental life systems that we rely on in the oceans. And that brings me on to the impacts on biodiversity on land as well. Because of a mixture of land use and extreme climate, we are losing our soils. Up to 50% of the topsoils across the world are now degraded. And we're also losing our biodiversity, our plants and our creatures that we depend upon. The UK is actually one of the worst hit here, with 1 in 4 British mammals now being at risk of extinction. And across the next decade, it's predicted that up to 1 million different species are at risk or at threat of extinction. Scientists have said that we're now entering the 6th mass extinction event. And the thing is, it's not just about losing the wonders of nature. This is about losing a system that we rely upon to protect us, to feed us, to keep us in balance with nature. Nature and ecosystems are like a giant game of Jenga. Take out one thing from the bottom and the entire thing could collapse. We are at devastating losses of insects, of pollinators who help the crops to grow. Without earthworms, the soils cannot replenish themselves. Without bees, crops can't help to grow into the sort of crops that we could eat today. So this is all linked. The climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, the land degradation crisis, not to mention air pollution, another knock-on effect of fossil fuel use. More than 80 people every day across the UK die because of air pollution. The UK is at illegal levels of air pollution. Here in the UK, that's 24 people a day. So, climate change has been caused by humans. It is going to lead to catastrophic impacts on our planet. The science is 100% clear. I was going to say 99% of scientists agree with this, but that is the truth across the globe. But fundamentally, you can't argue with physics. So I'm going to hand back over to Josh now to introduce some speakers who are going to talk to specific areas of this climate and ecological crisis. And I urge you to listen to the science, to decide for yourselves, and to put pressure on the governments to act, and to act now. Thank you.
Thank you. Got Emily Grossman one more time. So we've now got a few talks that are going to go into more details on specific aspects of the crisis. So first up, we have a climate scientist. He's a paleoclimatologist, an oceanographer from University College London. I'll give you Dr. Peter Spooner.
Hey lads, if you're just joining us, we're at Trafalgar Square where exile scientists are giving talks about the climate crisis. Come along, you can learn the truth.
We'll see. So I'm a scientist, I'm a climate scientist. I work here in London. I'm not a science communicator, and that's been part of some of the problem for a long time, okay? Lots of climate scientists out there have been telling people this stuff for decades, yeah? But we do it in a way which doesn't seem to have worked. It doesn't seem to have driven any sort of noticeable changes. And part of that is because Emily has just nicely laid out for you most of the problems, okay? And when people hear those problems, we get this kind of conflict in our brains where we know we've been part of causing this problem, but we don't want to feel guilty about it. And so our brains kind of switch off from the problem, okay? It's a bit like if someone catches you doing something naughty, you know you've been doing it, and then you're annoyed that you've been caught, so maybe you have an argument with them instead of admitting what you've been doing. Yeah, so there's this problem with our brains. But that's all psychology, and I'm not a psychologist, so I'll try and get back to the climate science. As a climate scientist, I could stand here and talk to the specifics of what might happen, climate predictions, what we think is going to happen, okay? My background is actually studying what happened way in the past, before humans could measure the climate system, okay? And from those studies, we know that the Earth system's climate has changed over time. Like loads of people say, oh, the climate's always changed, yeah? But because I've seen how the climate has changed, we kind of can use that to make some predictions about what's coming. And we've heard a lot from Emily and others already today about what these different effects might be. So we might get warming, we might get melting of ice, sea level rise, all this kind of stuff. And probably right now you're feeling pretty, oh, crikey. All like these things, and I can't do anything about it, okay? I'm just going to add something else. So what has not been mentioned is these things called climate feedbacks, okay? So at some point in the future, maybe we get to 3 degrees warming, okay? And then we might find that the Earth does something unexpected. It's really difficult to predict some of these things. So, for example, if we melt all the Arctic ice, we might start melting Greenland. We're going to get more sunlight, and that's going to warm the planet even more. We might start to melt the permafrost in some areas, and that's going to release loads of methane, which is a really powerful greenhouse gas. Yeah. So there's these feedback processes which might kick in if we go and warm too much. At the moment, we have the ability, we have the control to reverse, or if at least stabilise, the impact that we've had on the planet. Okay, we have that control, we have that freedom. Okay, we can make the choice to do that. If these feedback processes kick in, okay, maybe we'll lose that freedom. We can't control what the Earth is going to do around us if these things start happening. Okay, so imagine, for example, this is based on a true story from my childhood. You're running down a hill, okay? It's not that steep. It's got nice grass. You're enjoying yourself. You're running quite fast. You're getting a bit faster. At this point, you have control. The hill gets a bit more steep, okay? You run a bit faster because gravity's helping you out. You still have enough control to turn aside if you want. But then what happens if you were looking around, you're having such a good time, you didn't notice what was coming up ahead of you, and suddenly there's this big gully, and the hill gets really steep, really quickly, okay? You're going to have to speed up. You can't control yourself now. The hill's so steep, your feet just have to speed up to try and keep your balance. Okay? The only way you could stop yourself at this point is to try and fall over and roll down the hill, and that's going to hurt rather a lot. Okay? And then maybe you get to another gully. These are the feedbacks, yeah? It's a metaphor. Yeah. Got that? Great. You get to another one, you speed up even more, and eventually you get to the bottom of this valley, which may be filled with huge rocks. Yeah, really dangerous. Based on a true story. Okay? But what would happen if instead you were to look around you? So what we're doing, what we're trying to do as scientists, is to give people that chance to look ahead and see what's coming, okay? And if we can see what's coming, we still have that control, that freedom to turn aside and do something else. Maybe there's a wall in the way, okay? It's difficult to shift society into a different pattern, okay? But if you look around yourself now, there's people standing around you who can help you get over that wall, okay? We can all help ourselves make this change that needs to happen, okay? So, I guess my main message is, if we don't act very soon, we could lose the freedom to do what we want in the future. Our kids and grandkids certainly wouldn't have that freedom, okay? So now we have the freedom, I want to act to keep that freedom, and I imagine that most of you do as well. Thank you very much.
Dr. Peter Spooner. Words are hard sometimes. Okay, so we've heard a lot about the climate side of the emergency. Now we're going to hear about the ecological side of the emergency. So I'm going to bring on a professor of ecology to tell you about biodiversity loss, Professor James Bullock.
Thanks very much. Hello everyone. Yes, so I'm an ecologist. And,
Closer to you, please.
you've heard a lot about how the climate, you can hear okay? Sorry. You heard a lot about the climate emergency. I'm going to talk about the ecological and biodiversity emergency. Now this has been around for a long time, like the climate emergency. For example, a few years before I was born, like that, a few years before I was born, a very famous book was published by someone called Rachel Carson. It was called Silent Spring. Is this okay? I'm being gestured at. You can hear okay. It was called Silent Spring. And what Rachel Carson did was she was concerned about what she saw of the effects of pesticides on the nature around her. And she went around, talked to lots of scientists, gathered loads of evidence, and published this very famous book showing how pesticides were decimating the wildlife of America and the rest of the world. The very famous example was DDT, which some older people will remember, was implicated in the death of birds by causing thinning of eggshells. And in this book, she also, surprise, surprise, explained how the chemical industry had systematically covered up the evidence of damage to the natural world. Move forward, over 50 years later, we've seen pesticides are still causing problems. We've studied neonicotinoids, chemicals which are used widely on our agricultural land and which have been linked to declines in our bees, in other insects, in fish, in birds, etc. And DDT was banned after many years of the science showing it was a problem, and neonicotinoids are gradually being banned from being used by farmers. So that's a positive story, but it's negative in the sense we keep repeating the same mistakes. Now, as I've just said, my name's James Bullock, I'm an academic ecologist, and I work in a publicly funded research institute. I've spent my career understanding how nature works, trying to understand biodiversity loss, but also what we might do about it, so the positive side. What is biodiversity? It's probably a word you've heard a lot. It's basically the diversity of life on Earth. That's the great myriad of species we see around us, the great variety of ecosystems across the world and in the sea. And this biodiversity is suffering terribly. Globally, there's a massive and accelerating loss of biodiversity. There was a recent report by something called the IPBES, which was a global effort to document what we're doing to the environment around us. One of the amazing statistics from this study is that an estimated 1 million animal and plant species are at risk of extinction in the near future. We estimate there's about 8.1 million species of plant and animals on this world, so that's a massive proportion. And if the world is too much for you to think of, what about this country? How are we doing here? Well, we publish in this country the State of Nature report, which again documents what we're doing to our biodiversity. And similarly, it comes up, a recent version of the report said about 15% of our species are similarly threatened with extinction. And this isn't just a future thing that might happen if we carry on the path we're on. We have seen extinctions caused by human activities across the world and in this country alone. Just in the last century, we've seen the loss of a wonderful, beautiful bird called the red-backed shrike. The large tortoiseshell butterfly has gone extinct. The black-back ant. Now, these may all sound fairly obscure species that you wouldn't have come across in your everyday life, but as Emily said earlier, each of these species is a vital part of ecosystems, and their loss and continuing loss could cause unknown consequences. And we're not just lost species, we are losing many species as I speak. The lady's slipper orchid, a beautiful plant, is present in only one site in the British Isles. The high-brown fritillary, the great yellow bumblebee, are also declining rapidly. And that may seem a long way from London, but if you look around you on the trees, not that many years ago, the common house sparrow would have been fluttering around between these trees. That's virtually disappeared from London. So we're seeing that biodiversity loss around us every day, and in all our lives we're suffering from it. And we're not just losing our species, we're losing our ecosystems. And this loss is happening incredibly rapidly. We look back to the 1930s, when my mum was a girl, just within living memory certainly. Over the time since the 1930s, we've lost over 90% of our flower-rich grasslands, which have been ploughed up and polluted by fertilisers. Over half of our heathlands have gone, being built on and planted with conifers. A woodland cover, there's a lot of talk about planting trees. Only 12% of our land is covered in woodland, and a large proportion of that is conifers. The rest of the EU, about 37% of the land is under woodland. So we are suffering worse than many countries in the world. And the biodiversity loss has many causes, but basically humans use about 75% of the global land area for our own purposes, for living on, for producing crops, etc. So we're leaving little space for other species to live on. And the specific examples, we're expanding agriculture into new areas, ploughing up habitats, grubbing up hedgerows, draining wet areas. We're intensifying farming, we're using more pesticides, more fertilisers, we're developing new cropping systems which produce more food, but which damage the environment even more so. We've got urban spread. Not just building houses, but building roads, infiltrating the countryside further and further. We've seen introduction of invasive species. So this is the global trade which we carry out to keep our systems going. And they're also causing loss of our biodiversity. And I'll just speed up and finish off. But I was going to finish off with not just the negatives, what we can do about this. And much of my work, and many others around the world, has been how to halt and reverse these losses in biodiversity. And we've been looking into how to make farming more sustainable, reducing chemical use, planting new habitat for birds, butterflies and bees, restoring ecosystems by planting new habitat onto farmland, onto ex-industrial sites, by introducing species. Some species we've lost, like the large blue, is a great success story of how we can reintroduce them. Rewilding, making complex new systems of nature which can be resilient to future change and which can help people reconnect to nature. So ultimately, while we're suffering this terrible loss, we have the scientific knowledge to halt and to start to reverse the biodiversity losses. The scientists know what needs to be done. We need the political and social will to get that done. Thank you.
Thank you, James. So our next speaker is one of the co-founders of our group,
where the scientists from Extinction Rebellion are holding a series of mini debates, seminars and talks about the climate and ecological crisis. These are scientists who actually know what they are talking about because they have studied it and have real degrees and stuff. So please, if you're around, in London, get yourself down to Trafalgar Square to support the scientists of Extinction Rebellion and learn the truth about the climate and ecological crisis. It's not all doom and gloom. We can do something, but we need to act now to halt biodiversity loss and damage to ecosystems and the climate that will lead to runaway heating of the planet, causing flooding, desertification, displacement of human beings, basically an end to life as we know it, unless we act now. Going to sign off for now. Thank you for joining us. Really appreciate the love and support, and see you again very soon with love, peace, respect, science, and a little bit of rage from Trafalgar Square in London.
So from a biologist's perspective, what's happening is just what happens to any biological system. So with any species,